Okay, welcome to another tutorial video. As you can see today, we're officially going to be starting a new topic in this channel, which is project finance and infrastructure modeling. Now, project finance is certainly a new hot area. We've been getting lots of questions about it, and coincidentally, we actually have a new project finance and infrastructure modeling course as well. So this video will cover some of the technical and financial modeling differences in project finance. There's an accompanying article on mergers and acquisitions that focuses more on the career and recruiting differences. So here's the URL of the article. It's a long URL, so I'll just pin this as the first comment below the video, and you can go in this and get the career and recruiting differences and also the sample Excel file that we'll be going through right here. I've created a very simple project finance style Excel file with some cash flow projections. This is intentionally simple, although it actually does have some VBA code and a very simple macro in it, because I want to focus on the concepts and how project finance differs from other fields at a high level. All this, again, is a summary from our project finance and infrastructure course. So the plan for this tutorial will be to go through a 2-minute summary first, then we'll talk about the assets and legal structures, we'll talk about the time frame and model structure in project finance, then go through how debt is used and what the terminal value assumption looks like, and then how the deal math works overall in these deals. Here's the 2-minute summary. Project finance is a bit of a broad term, but it refers to deals, whether they're acquisitions or new developments or debt and equity financings for capital-intensive infrastructure projects that provide essential utilities and services. So the sectors here include utilities, transportation, energy and power, something like a power plant or a pipeline, for example, natural resources like lithium or gold mining or oil and gas, and also social infrastructure like hospitals, for example. Now, technically speaking, project finance is sort of like debt capital markets or leverage finance at banks, but specifically for infrastructure assets rather than normal companies. However, in reality, most people use project finance as a bit of a catch-all or general term for all types of deals involving these infrastructure assets. But technically, yes, it does relate specifically to the debt side of this analysis. Since it is debt related, you focus very heavily on the downside risk in models. So what are you comfortable lending a company to develop a new power plant or to buy a power plant? What terms would you offer? What interest rate would you offer? I have this table here showing some of the key differences. The types of assets are certainly different. In corporate finance, you're dealing with entire companies and the full financial statements. Project finance, you're dealing with specific infrastructure assets instead. The legal structure is also quite different because in corporate finance, the debt and equity are at the corporate level and they potentially affect everything in the company. But in project finance, there's a special purpose vehicle or SPV that isolates each asset and its debt from everything else in the company. And so the lenders only have a claim on that specific asset if something goes wrong. The time frame and the model structure are also quite different. Project finance, many assets last for several decades or more. So you're going to project well beyond just 3 to 5 years that you'd see in a typical corporate model. Also, in a corporate model, you have the 3 financial statements, but in project finance, you tend to focus on cash flow. And you may have supporting schedules, but you don't necessarily need all 3 financial statements. And then the debt usage and the terminal value assumptions are also quite different. In project finance, the debt is often sized and sculpted based on the asset's future cash flows. The terminal value doesn't necessarily exist because the assets only last for so long, they degrade over time, they wear down, and they need to be rebuilt. So you can't just assume they operate indefinitely into the future as you often do with corporate finance. So that's the 2-minute summary. Let's now go into each of these parts in a little bit more detail. With the assets and the legal structures, I think the assets part is pretty straightforward. You're only dealing with infrastructure, you're not dealing with normal companies. The legal side is a little bit more subtle. The most obvious thing is that since the assets are ring-fenced, if something goes wrong, the lender cannot go to the company that owns a specific asset and then lay claim to the company's other assets. It can only seize collateral that is related to that one specific asset where there was a problem, such as a default or a covenant breach. But this also means that from the lender's perspective, they have more risk now because they cannot claim as much as they could with traditional corporate debt. So in practice, they often require significantly higher buffers on the debt, such as maybe a 1.5x debt service coverage ratio, even for relatively safe assets. And if you go to the sample Excel file, the loan life coverage ratio, which is effectively the same as the debt service coverage ratio here, is 1.5x. This means that the maximum debt service has to be significantly lower than the cash flow that is actually available to service the debt, and it's partially as a result of this legal structure. In terms of the time frame in the model structure, since these infrastructure assets can last for decades and have pretty predictable cash flows in a lot of cases, it's very common to see 20 or 30-year models in this field. And if you look at our sample file here, it does go out to about 20 years. And this is not at all uncommon for project finance. Of course, it will be very uncommon for corporate finance. You can certainly set up a 3-statement projection model for infrastructure assets, and you will see it sometimes. But since cash flow is so important, you really tend to focus on the cash flows and models, and you don't necessarily need a full balance sheet projection. Effectively, you just need an income statement and a mini cash flow statement, similar to what you might do for a simplified leverage buyout model. Some of the key cash flow metrics are cash flow available for debt service, which is EBITDA minus maintenance capex, plus or minus the change in working capital minus cash taxes. There will also be reserve items and maybe hedging related items in here, depending on the type of asset. Once you go below that, then you have the debt service and the cash flow post-debt service or cash flow to equity. So these are some of the key metrics that you like to focus on in these types of models. There may be supporting schedules for capital expenditures, for debt and equity draws, for reserves, for taxes. It depends on the model complexity, but the bottom line is you don't need the official 3 financial statements here. In terms of the debt usage, if you look at a standard LBO model, there is a very heavy focus on debt, typically as a multiple of EBITDA. The exit value is also critical because over time, the company needs to repay debt or it needs to become more valuable in some other way. But the bottom line is that there is an exit value. It is typically based on a multiple of EBITDA, and even outside of leverage buyout models. In a DCF, for example, the terminal value is widely used, and it's assumed that the company can just keep operating forever, or at least for a very, very long time into the future. You see this if you look at some of our examples. We always have a purchase multiple in an LBO model. We have an EBITDA exit multiple. All the debt is also based on a multiple of EBITDA. But on the project finance side, this is all quite different. The debt is often sized and sculpted based on future cash flows, and there may not even be a terminal value or exit value. Lenders want some type of buffer, and so the debt is always tied to these future cash flows, and specifically it's usually based on the present value of the future cash flows over the debt term and some type of coverage ratio or buffer on top of that. For example, in our model here, essentially what we're doing is taking the present value of cash flow available for debt service over the tenor of the debt, which is 10 years in this case. So we go down and we take our cash flow available for debt service. It is a 10-year term. And so we go all the way out to year 10 and take the present value of this. And then to get the initial debt balance, we simply divide by the target loan life coverage ratio, which is again equivalent to the debt service coverage ratio in this case. And that gets us the initial debt balance of about $825 million. You just wouldn't see this approach for the most part in most corporate finance scenarios, but it is very common and expected in project finance. Now, with the terminal value or exit value, the issue here is that something like a power plant, a solar plant or a wind farm, or even a natural gas or a coal plant is not going to last forever. It might have a useful life of 20, 30, 40 years, something in that range. So you can't just assume that it keeps operating for 100 years into the future. It's completely unrealistic. Now, if you sell the asset well before the end of the useful life, maybe you sell it in year 10, but it's going to last for 30 years, you could assume something for the exit value, but you're going to have to do it at a discounted multiple due to the reduced useful life. So in our model here, for example, we're saying that the purchase multiple of this power plant is 10 times EBITDA. If you go down and look at the returns calculations, we have our upfront investor equity, which we backed into based on the allowed debt and the purchase enterprise value. And then we have our cash flow post debt service each year. But if you go to the very end here, year 20, you'll see that we have nothing for the exit value or terminal value. Now, if we were to sell this asset in year 10 and it had 10 years of remaining useful life, it would be reasonable to assume something for the exit value, but we probably couldn't get a 10x EBITDA multiple. It would have to be lower than this. We don't know what it would be. We'd have to run the numbers, but it might be 4x, 5x, 6x, something like that is quite a bit lower than the 10x due to the fact that only half the useful life remains at that point. Now, in the last part here, I want to go over how some of the deal math works, because if you've been following along so far, you might be saying, wait a minute. In a standard LBO model, for example, the exit assumptions are huge. In fact, the deal wouldn't really work without this, because in a lot of LBO models, the sponsor, the private equity firm, is not even earning anything during the holding period. So how can you possibly make an infrastructure deal work if there is no terminal value or exit value? I'll answer this question in 3 parts. The first point is that the returns expectations are often lower. So infrastructure investors might be targeting a 10% equity IRR or something around it rather than a 20% IRR as you might see in private equity. The second point is that leverage is substantial and it is often, though not always, higher than it is in a traditional leverage buyout or many other types of M&A deals. In project finance, it might be 50, 60% of the purchase price, or perhaps even higher than that depending on the industry and the region. And then the last point is that the margins and cash flow yields are high. If you have an asset with a 60% or 80% EBITDA margin far above what any normal company would get, and then you have a 10% yield on equity, the equity IRR can be 10% or higher if you hold it long enough over the right period and the cash flows keep growing over time. So if we go here and just take a look at this, for reference, the purchase enterprise value right now at this 10x EBITDA multiple is about 1.8 billion. I'm just going to copy and paste this. We have an 85% EBITDA margin, and the cash flow yield here is around 5 to 10% initially, and then once all the debt is repaid, it jumps up significantly, and it is more like 25% to 30%, which explains how we get to a 10% IRR here. Just to show you how important these points are, if we go in, and now we say that our expenses are 4 times what they were previously. So let's increase the cash operating expenses here by 4x. And I'm just going to copy and paste in the new values right here. And I didn't capture the ones in the beginning, so let's just do that. So let's take all these as values and then paste them up here. So now our EBITDA margins are much lower, around 40%. Let's go and resize and resculpt the debt to match this new cash flow profile. Now our purchase enterprise value is now much lower because the EBITDA is lower, but just for fun, just for sake of argument, let's plug in the old purchase enterprise value that we had. So the EBITDA margins are now much lower, but we're paying the same purchase price. With these changed assumptions, the equity IRR now falls to 1%. And that's how important it is to have these very high margins and these very high cash flow yields. Because if the margins are only 40% and the cash flow yields are only 2 or 3%, going up to maybe 10% by the end, the deal math simply doesn't work and we get to a 1% IRR instead. And so that is why these points are both critical in project finance models. That's about it. So let's do a quick recap and summary. I think this table does a pretty good job of summarizing everything. You are dealing with infrastructure assets. You're dealing with assets that are ring fenced from everything else. The time frame is much longer. You focus on cash flows. The debt is sized and sculpted based on future cash flows, and the terminal value or exit value often does not exist. In terms of the assets and legal structures, we just went over those points, but the most important thing is that since the assets and their debt are all separated, that reduces the risk for the owners of the assets, but it makes lenders a little bit more hesitant because they can't claim as much as they could in a standard corporate debt deal, for example. The time frame is much longer, and I show you an example of that. With the model structure, there is a very heavy focus on different types of cash flow. Cash flow available for debt service, cash flow post-debt service, cash flow to equity. Those are the types of metrics you focus on over these 20 or 30-year models. The debt is sized and sculpted, and I showed you an example here where we take the present value of the cash flow available for debt service over the 10-year life of this debt. We divide by the loan life coverage ratio to get the initial debt balance. We size and sculpt everything using some simple VBA code. There is no terminal value in this case because we assume the asset simply degrades over time and cannot be sold at the end of 20 years. And then the deal math works because the margins here are very high, 60%, 80%, 90%. The cash flow yields are also very high. And so project finance deals, in essence, come down to paying an appropriate price and using the right amount of debt and making sure nothing really bad happens in the future. And if you do that, you can usually get to a reasonable IRR, such as around 10% without too much trouble. That's it for this lesson. Hopefully now you know a little bit more about this field and you have a simple example of an Excel file you can use to understand more.